You won't believe how quickly a dream can turn into a nightmare. Sofia Ramirez thought she had everything: an empire at her fingertips, a love story fit for a movie, and the one thing she wanted more than anything: a family. She had spent years standing beside Damien Sinclair, not just as his wife, but as his partner in building a life that felt untouchable. For a while, it was. Their love story had unfolded like a carefully written script. She met Damien during her final year at Columbia University, at a charity gala she had barely been able to afford a dress for. He was already making headlines in the tech world, a brilliant strategist, the heir to a billion-dollar logistics empire, and the kind of man who walked into a room and made people listen. He had spotted her across the ballroom, offered her a drink, and somehow, within minutes, she had gone from being just another guest to the woman who captivated him. The connection had been instant, electric. She wasn't like the women who usually surrounded him, those who came from old money, who had been groomed for a life of quiet luxury. Sofia had fought for everything. Her parents, hard-working Mexican immigrants who had built a life in Austin, had instilled a relentless ambition in her. She had dreams of working in global policy, of changing the world in her own way. Damien had admired that, or so she thought. The life they built together had been intoxicating. Private jets, invitations to exclusive galas, and a penthouse in Manhattan with floor-to-ceiling windows that made the city look like it belonged to them. They had been inseparable, a team, and when she found out she was pregnant, she had never felt more complete. But in hindsight, maybe that was the first moment things changed. At first, she blamed it on stress. Damien was expanding Sinclair Global Logistics into international markets, securing high-profile deals in Dubai, Singapore, and London. The demands on his time had never been greater, and she understood that. After all, she had been there since the early days when he was still proving himself outside of his family's shadow. She knew what pressure looked like. Still, there were moments, small ones but unsettling, when she felt a shift. Like the night they had dinner at La Grenouille, their usual French spot in the Upper East Side. She had been glowing, hand resting on her barely there baby bump, telling him about the nursery designs she had been obsessing over. He had nodded, smiled at the right moments, but his eyes had flickered to his phone more than once. "Everything okay?" she had asked, half laughing, trying to shake off the unease curling in her stomach. "Yeah," he had said too quickly, flipping the phone face down. "Just work. You know how it is." She had known, but something about the way he said it, the quick deflection, the flicker of something unreadable in his expression, had planted a seed of doubt she couldn't quite ignore. And then there was the night she woke up at 2 a.m. to find his side of the bed empty. She had wandered into the living room, expecting to find him buried in emails. Instead, she heard the low murmur of his voice from his office. Door cracked just enough for her to see the glow of his laptop screen. "I told you not now," he had whispered, tone sharp. A pause. A sigh. "I'll see you when I get back." Sofia had frozen. A business call, she had told herself. That's all it was. He had been exhausted lately, constantly traveling, barely sleeping. But then he had emerged from the office, startled to see her standing there. "Hey," he had said, voice softening as he took in her disheveled state. "Couldn't sleep?" She had hesitated. "Neither could you." He had closed the distance between them, pressing a kiss to her forehead, his hands lingering on her waist. "Just work stuff. I didn't want to wake you." The warmth of his touch had almost been enough to quiet the nagging feeling inside her. Almost. Still, she hadn't pushed. Because she loved him. Because she believed in them. Because she was carrying his child. But doubts had a way of growing. The following weeks had been a blur of missed dinners, last-minute trips, and half-hearted explanations. And yet, every time she questioned it, he gave her just enough reassurance to keep her from unraveling. A thoughtful gift, an impromptu weekend getaway to their Hamptons house, a moment of tenderness that reminded her why she had fallen for him in the first place. But the truth had a way of revealing itself. And soon, Sofia would come face to face with the kind of betrayal that would change everything. Sofia had always trusted her instincts. It was what had gotten her this far in life, from chasing an Ivy League education to carving out a place for herself in a world dominated by old money and generational wealth. She knew when someone was lying, when a deal wasn't worth taking, when a situation felt off. But for the first time, she wasn't sure if her instincts were betraying her, or if she was betraying herself by ignoring them. Because if she admitted what her gut was telling her, she'd have to accept something she wasn't ready for. At least, not yet. It started with little things, things she could explain away if she tried hard enough. Damien had been working longer hours, taking more international trips, canceling dinner plans at the last minute. His usual affectionate texts had become shorter, more mechanical. Busy day, love you. Flight delayed. Be home late. Don't wait up. Sophia told herself it was just business. After all, she had spent years by his side, watching him build Sinclair Global Logistics into a powerhouse. She knew the pressure he was under. And yet something felt different. The shift was so subtle at first that she almost convinced herself it was in her head. Almost. Until the fundraiser at the plaza. It was an annual event, a gathering of the city's elite under chandeliers and velvet-lined banquets. Sophia had attended so many of these events that she had perfected the art of polite detachment, just enough charm to be engaging, just enough distance to avoid getting caught up in the toxic gossip. But that night, something was off. She could feel it the moment she stepped into the ballroom. People were looking at her. Not in admiration, not in curiosity, in pity. It was subtle. The slight hesitation before someone smiled at her, the hushed conversations that stopped just as she passed by, a lingering glance too sympathetic to be normal. Like they knew something she didn't. And then, Isabella. Sophia, her best friend's voice cut through the low hum of conversation. She turned, relieved to see a familiar face. But one look at Isabella's expression, and her stomach tightened. Bella, she said lightly, forcing a smile. You look like you're about to tell me someone died. Isabella didn't smile back. I didn't want to say anything. I swear, I didn't. But I'd rather you hear it from me than from someone who enjoys watching you suffer. Sophia's chest tightened. She barely registered the sound of a waiter offering champagne. The entire room had faded into a low hum. Just say it. Isabella exhaled like she had been holding her breath. Damien, there are rumors. A dry laugh escaped Sophia's lips before she could stop it. Rumors? She shook her head, reaching for a flute of champagne she didn't really want. Come on, Bella. You know how this world works. People love to talk about men like Damien. I know, Isabella said carefully, but this isn't just talk. She hesitated, then lowered her voice. People have seen them together. Sophia's hand tightened around the glass. The room felt like it had shrunk, the air suddenly too thick. Who? She asked, her voice quieter now. Isabella hesitated. Elena Moreau. A name. Not just whispers, not just paranoia. A real person. Sophia knew who she was, of course. Elena was, well, Elena. Young, stunning, impossibly poised. The kind of woman who never had to fight for attention because the world had already decided to hand it to her. For a moment, Sophia felt an odd sense of detachment, like she was watching someone else process this information. Then, the pieces started clicking together. The late-night phone calls. The lipstick stain he had brushed off. The sudden changes in his schedule. The scent of a perfume she didn't own lingering on his clothes. Things she had noticed but ignored. Because the alternative was too painful. Because she had been so sure Damien loved her. Because she was carrying his child. Isabella reached for her hand. Soph, I don't know for sure. I appreciate your concern, Sophia interrupted, her voice steadier than she felt. But I know my husband. She forced a smile, then turned away before Isabella could say anything else. Because if she stood there a second longer, she might start shaking. And she refused to fall apart in a room full of people who were already waiting to watch her break. That night, she lay awake beside Damien, staring at the ceiling. He was sleeping soundly, his breathing slow and even. She could confront him. Right now. Wake him up and demand the truth. But what if the truth destroyed her? She turned onto her side, pressing a hand against her stomach. The baby moved, a small, fluttering reminder of the life growing inside her. It wasn't just about her anymore. The next morning, she tried to pretend everything was normal. She came downstairs to find Damien adjusting his cufflinks, dressed in a charcoal suit, looking effortlessly put together. He smiled when he saw her. Morning, sweetheart. She studied him, searching. For guilt, for hesitation, for anything. But there was nothing. He leaned in, pressing a kiss to her cheek. I've got meetings all day. Shouldn't be too late, though. Want me to bring home dinner? Her throat tightened. How could he act so normal? How could he kiss her with the same lips? She inhaled sharply. Damien? He glanced up as he reached for his watch. She steadied herself. Is there something you need to tell me? There. She had given him a chance. For a fraction of a second she saw it, the briefest flicker in his expression, but it was gone as quickly as it came. Sophia, what's this about? His voice was light. Easy, too easy. Her heart pounded. I just feel like you've been distant, she said carefully, and I've been hearing things. Damien sighed, stepping closer. Baby, stop. He took her hands, rubbing his thumb over her skin. People love to talk, you know that. The same excuse she had told herself 1,000 times. Only this time, she didn't believe it. Because once a seed of doubt is planted, it doesn't just sit there, it grows. And soon, it takes over everything. Sophia had spent weeks convincing herself she was being paranoid, that Damien was just working late, that the rumors were nothing but gossip, that the hollow feeling in her chest wasn't real, just the weight of pregnancy and stress. But doubt had a way of creeping in, like a slow poison. And once it took hold, it didn't let go. She found herself noticing the small things more often. The way Damien checked his phone with his screen tilted away from her, the way he avoided eye contact when she asked about his work trips, the way his cologne smelled different on certain nights. Little things. Things she wanted to ignore, but she couldn't. So when he told her he had a last-minute meeting in the city and would be staying at the company's penthouse for the night, something inside her cracked. The words left her lips before she could stop them. Where exactly is this meeting? Damien barely looked up from his phone. Midtown. Nothing exciting. Her heart pounded. Who's it with? He sighed, setting his phone down. Sophia, why are you asking me this? Because I don't believe you. She swallowed hard, forcing a smile. I just miss you. You've been so busy lately. His expression softened, and for a second, she almost let herself believe him. Almost. But when he kissed her goodbye and walked out the door, a strange, cold certainty settled in her bones. She needed to know the truth. She didn't call first. Something inside her told her not to. Instead, she drove. The Hamptons' house was supposed to be their retreat, their escape from the chaos of the city. It was where they had spent summer weekends, where Damien had once promised they'd grow old together. But as Sophia pulled up the long driveway, a sick feeling twisted in her stomach. There was a car parked outside, a sleek black sports car, not his. She stepped out of her own car, hands trembling as she reached for her keys. The house was eerily quiet as she approached the front door. No lights on in the main living room, no music playing. But then, laughter, muffled, intimate, the sound of him and her. Sophia didn't even realize she had stopped breathing. Her hand closed around the doorknob, twisted. The door swung open, and there they were, Damien. Shirt unbuttoned, hair tousled, sitting on the couch. Elena Moreau, wearing nothing but one of his dress shirts, curled up beside him. For a moment no one moved. Then Damien looked up, his face paled. Sophia! The room blurred. Her pulse pounded in her ears, drowning out every other sound. She had imagined this moment so many times, wondering if she was wrong, if she was crazy, if she was destroying her own marriage with her doubts. But this wasn't doubt. This was proof. A sharp, ugly laugh escaped her lips. So it's true. Elena, to her credit, didn't look embarrassed. If anything, there was a smirk tugging at the corner of her lips. Sophia's stomach turned. Damien stood, reaching for her. Sophia, I can explain. She flinched away. Don't touch me. Her voice didn't even sound like her own. She should have screamed, should have thrown something, should have fallen apart right then and there. But instead, she just felt empty. Damien ran a hand through his hair. I never wanted you to find out like this. Sophia laughed again, the sound sharp and bitter. Like this? She gestured at Elena, who was watching the scene unfold like it was a mildly interesting play. So you did want me to find out? He exhaled heavily. I made a mistake. Her vision blurred. A mistake, that was what he was calling it. Not a choice. Not a betrayal. A mistake. Her fingers curled into fists. I hate you. The words were soft, calm, and somehow they felt more powerful than if she had screamed them. She turned and walked away. Damien called her name, but she didn't stop, didn't look back, didn't let herself break. Not yet. Not in front of them. She didn't remember the drive back to the city. One moment she was in the Hamptons. The next she was in their Manhattan penthouse, staring at the life she had built with a man who had just shattered her world, a life that no longer existed. Her phone buzzed. Damien. She let it ring. Then again, and again. Finally she answered. His voice was strained. Sophia, please. We need to talk. She inhaled slowly. We're done, Damien. A pause. You don't mean that. She closed her eyes. I do. I love you. His voice cracked. It didn't mean anything. She didn't mean anything. She laughed, a hollow sound. You threw away our marriage for something that didn't mean anything? Silence. And for the first time she realized she didn't feel powerless anymore. You'll hear from my lawyer, she said, then ended the call. Sophia had been in pain before. She had lost friends, lost opportunities, lost versions of herself she would never get back. But nothing had ever broken her like this. Not because Damien had cheated, not even because he had lied to her face over and over again, but because for years she had built her life around a man who had never truly valued her, and she would never make that mistake again. The first days after the betrayal passed in a haze. She didn't eat much, barely slept. She stayed at a hotel, unable to step foot in the penthouse that no longer felt like home. But even through the heartbreak, she knew one thing. She wasn't going to let Damien win. She met with a lawyer the next morning. Brenda Martinez was sharp, ruthless, and exactly the kind of woman Sophia needed in her corner. Do you want to fight? Brenda asked after hearing everything. Sophia hesitated. I just want to be free. Brenda nodded. Then let's make sure he can't touch you again. And so it began. Damien didn't take it well. He called, texted, even showed up at her hotel once. Sophia, please, he said, standing at her door, looking tired and disheveled. I made a mistake, that's all it was. She stared at him, emotionless. A mistake? He nodded. You don't throw away a marriage over a mistake. Her fingers curled around the doorframe. You did. His jaw tightened. I'll fight for this marriage. She let out a short, bitter laugh. You should have fought for it before you brought another woman into our bed. And with that, she shut the door in his face. But Damien wasn't just fighting for their marriage. He was fighting for control. The divorce took a nasty turn almost immediately. Despite being the one who cheated, Damien tried to control the narrative. The media spun stories. Billionaire's wife flees, leaving him heartbroken, and Damien Sinclair's tragic love story. He's playing the victim, Brenda warned. This is strategy. He wants you to look irrational. Sophia clenched her teeth. Then I won't give him the satisfaction. She stayed silent, avoided the press, but when Damien tried to push for joint ownership of their business investments, she pushed back. Over my dead body, she told Brenda. And Brenda made sure Damien didn't get a single cent more than he deserved. She left New York as soon as the divorce papers were signed. She didn't want to be in the same city as him, didn't want to breathe the same air, so she went somewhere new, somewhere far. Barcelona. She had always loved it there, the energy, the history, the beauty. It was a city of reinvention, and she was ready to reinvent herself. At first, it wasn't easy. Starting over never was. She had been Sophia Sinclair for so long that being just Sophia Ramirez again felt foreign. But little by little, she found herself. She found an apartment, small but beautiful, with a balcony overlooking the streets below. She found a cafe she loved, where she spent mornings drinking strong Spanish coffee and sketching ideas for a new business venture. She found peace. And most importantly, she found purpose. She didn't want to live off settlement money. She wanted to build something of her own. Damien had once told her she was too idealistic to run a business, so she set out to prove him wrong. She reached out to old contacts, put her experience in philanthropy and logistics to use, and soon she had a plan, a startup, a company that focused on helping small businesses in underdeveloped countries get access to global markets. She called it Nueva Vida, new life, because that's exactly what she was creating. Months passed. Sophia thrived. She worked harder than ever, pouring herself into the company. It wasn't easy, but for the first time in years, she was building something just for herself. And then, one day, she got an email from Damien. Her stomach twisted as she opened it. I heard about your company. Impressive. If you ever want an investor, you know where to find me. She stared at the screen. Then she laughed. Laughed until tears pricked at her eyes. The audacity. The absolute arrogance of this man. As if she would ever take a cent from him. As if she wasn't already winning without him. She deleted the email without responding, and for the first time in a long time, she felt truly, completely free. Sophia never imagined she would come this far. She had spent years living in Damien's shadow, believing her success was intertwined with his. But now, she stood at the helm of Nueva Vida, a company that had expanded across 3 continents, helping small businesses in underdeveloped countries connect with global markets. And she had done it all without him. The emails started coming first. Then the interview requests. Then the invitations. Sophia had built Nueva Vida from the ground up, but now the world was noticing. She was invited to speak at conferences in London, Dubai, and Tokyo. Business leaders reached out to discuss partnerships. Investors were eager to back her next phase of expansion. And then, the invitation to the Global Women's Entrepreneurship Summit. She stared at the email for a long moment, heart pounding. It was the event. The kind of platform that could push Nueva Vida into an entirely new league. She had to accept, but when she scrolled down to see the list of other featured speakers, her breath caught. Damien Sinclair. She told herself it didn't matter. She was past him. He was a name in her past, nothing more. And yet, when she arrived at the summit in Paris, the weight of it hit her. Walking into the grand conference hall, surrounded by journalists and business elites, she felt it, the eyes on her. Because everyone knew. They had read the articles, seen the headlines, watched the drama unfold. They were waiting to see what would happen when the billionaire's betrayed wife shared the same stage as the man who had humiliated her. Sophia lifted her chin and walked forward. She wasn't here for Damien. She was here for herself. She made it through her panel with ease. Spoke about empowering small businesses, about economic sustainability, about the power of independence. The audience was captivated. It was only afterward, as she stepped off stage and made her way through the VIP lounge, that she saw him. Damien. He looked exactly the same, perfectly tailored suit, effortlessly charming smile. But when their eyes met, she saw it. The flicker of something uncertain. He hadn't expected her to be here. Good. She turned away, ready to leave, but then, Sophia. His voice stopped her in her tracks. She hesitated for only a second before slowly turning to face him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Damien smiled, the same smile that had once made her weak. "You look incredible," he said, voice smooth as ever. "Success suits you." Sophia held his gaze, unshaken. It always did. A flicker of amusement in his expression. "I was wondering if we could talk." Talk? The audacity. She should have walked away, but instead she tilted her head. "Talk about what, Damien?" His smile didn't falter, but she saw the tension in his jaw. "I've been thinking a lot about the past, about us." Sophia raised an eyebrow. "Us?" "Yes," he said, stepping closer. "We were a great team, Sophia, and I never—" He exhaled as if choosing his words carefully. "I never should have let you go." She almost laughed. Almost. Instead she stared at him, at the man who had once held her heart in his hands and crushed it without a second thought. "Let me go?" she repeated. "Damien, you didn't let me go. You threw me away." He flinched. "That's not fair." She stepped forward now, voice calm but firm. "No, what's not fair is that I loved you, I trusted you, and you treated me like I was replaceable." Silence. Damien had no response to that, and for the first time she saw it. The regret. Not because he missed her, not because he loved her, but because she was thriving without him. She could have left then, but Damien wasn't done. "I know I can't change the past," he said, "but I can be part of your future." She stared at him, shocked by the sheer arrogance of it. "You think I would ever trust you again?" Damien's expression didn't shift. "I think we could rebuild something even stronger." Sophia exhaled slowly, and then she smiled, because suddenly she knew exactly what to say. "You know what, Damien?" she murmured, stepping so close that he had to listen. "You're right. We were a great team." His eyes flickered with hope. Then she leaned in just slightly. "But I don't need you anymore." And with that she turned and walked away, leaving him standing there. That night she stood on the rooftop of her Paris hotel, looking out at the glittering city below. Her phone buzzed. An email, an official offer from a major investor. Her company was about to scale to an entirely new level. Her lips curved into a smile. This was her victory. Not revenge, not getting back at Damien. Just winning on her own terms. and there was nothing more powerful than that. Success didn't feel like she had imagined it. It wasn't a grand moment of realization. It was a series of small moments, the quiet satisfaction of seeing Nueva Vida thrive, the confidence in knowing she had built something real, the peace of waking up without anxiety clawing at her chest. Sofia had won, and not because she had defeated anyone. She had won because she had chosen herself. But victory didn't mean the battle was over. She was in her office in Barcelona, overlooking the city skyline when the call came in. Her lawyer's voice was tense. "There's an issue with one of your partnerships." Sofia frowned. "What kind of issue?" A pause. "It's a lawsuit. And the other party? It's Sinclair Global." She stilled. "Damien?" She should have known he wouldn't stay silent forever. The legal papers arrived the next morning. A claim that Nueva Vida's supply chain solutions were built using proprietary logistics models owned by Sinclair Global. It was nonsense. Damien didn't own her ideas. He didn't own her, but he was trying to bury her in legal fees and stall her expansion. She knew this game. It wasn't about money, it was about control. And she wasn't about to let him win. They met one last time in a private conference room in Madrid. The tension in the air was suffocating. Damien sat across from her, looking as polished as ever. But there was something different in his eyes this time. He wasn't as confident as before. Because for the first time, he wasn't dealing with his wife. He was dealing with Sofia Ramirez, CEO of Nueva Vida. She folded her hands on the table. "What do you want, Damien?" His lips curved into a smirk. "That depends. What are you willing to offer?" She laughed, shaking her head. "Unbelievable. Sofia, let's be real here." He leaned back, voice smooth as ever. "This doesn't have to get ugly. You walk away from this market, I withdraw the lawsuit. Simple." Simple. She had spent years being told to step aside, to make room for Damien, to sacrifice herself for his ambitions. Never again. She met his gaze, unwavering. "You want me to step back from my own company?" she asked, voice deceptively calm. His expression didn't change. "It's just business." She leaned in slightly. "Then let me tell you something, Damien. Business is about power, and right now, I have more of it than you do." For the first time, his mask slipped. And that was all she needed to see. She didn't settle. She didn't back down. Instead, she fought. She brought in the best legal team in Europe. She called in every favor she had. And in the end, she won. The case was dismissed. Sinclair Global was ordered to pay damages for false claims. And Damien? His company's reputation took a massive hit. He had thought she would bend. Instead, he was the one who broke. The night of the ruling, Sofia stood on her balcony, watching the city lights below. She wasn't celebrating, because this wasn't about Damien anymore. This was about her journey. She had gone from being a woman trapped in a man's world to a woman who built her own empire. She had turned pain into power, and she had done it without losing herself. Weeks later, she got one final message from Damien. Not a call, not an email, just a text. "I should have never underestimated you." She stared at it for a moment, then she deleted it. That evening, she went to a small cafe near the beach, a place she had come to love, where no one cared about her past. As she sipped her coffee, a man approached her table. Not a stranger, someone she had met at a recent business event. He smiled. "Mind if I join you?" She hesitated. Then she gestured to the empty seat, not because she needed someone, but because, for the first time in a long time, she wanted to see where life would take her. Sofia had never felt lighter. For the first time in years, there were no chains tying her to the past. She woke up every morning with purpose, not pain. She didn't check her phone expecting another legal battle. She didn't flinch when she heard Damien's name. She didn't wonder what would have happened if she had fought harder for their marriage. Because now, she knew. The best fight she ever won was the one to free herself. Her life in Barcelona was no longer about running away. It was about choosing herself. She had built Nueva Vida into a global force, with partnerships spanning Latin America, Africa, and Asia. She was invited to speak at economic forums about sustainable business models. She mentored young female entrepreneurs, guiding them toward independence. She was everything Damien once told her she couldn't be, and she had done it without him. Then one afternoon, something unexpected happened. She was in her office when her assistant, Elena, knocked lightly on the door. "There's someone here to see you," Elena said, hesitating. Sofia barely glanced up. I don't have any meetings scheduled. Elena shifted awkwardly. It's someone from New York. Sophia froze. She slowly lifted her gaze. A single name flashed through her mind, but it wasn't Damien. It was someone she hadn't thought about in years. She walked into the lounge area of her office, heart pounding slightly. And there he was, Nicholas. Damien's best friend. A man who had once been like a brother to him, and at one point a friend to her too. She hadn't seen him since the divorce. He looked older, though not in a bad way, more worn, more settled, and when their eyes met, he smiled. "Wow," he said softly. "You really made it." Sophia crossed her arms, cautious. "What are you doing here, Nicholas?" He exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "I know I'm probably the last person you want to see, but I needed to talk to you." Sophia gestured for him to continue. "It's about Damien." Her stomach clenched, but not in the way it once would have. Not in fear, not in pain, just irritation. She sighed. "What does he want now?" Nicholas shook his head. "It's not like that. He's different." Sophia raised an eyebrow. "Different?" Nicholas hesitated. "I don't expect you to care, and I wouldn't blame you if you don't. But he's struggling, Sophia. He's lost investors. His reputation is damaged. And," he sighed, "honestly, I think he regrets everything." She let that sink in. Then she laughed. Nicholas blinked, startled. "That's what this is," she said, shaking her head. "You came all the way to Spain to tell me that Damien regrets losing me?" Nicholas hesitated. "I think he regrets who he became." Sophia tilted her head. "And what does that have to do with me?" Nicholas looked at her carefully. "I don't know. Maybe nothing. But maybe you're the only person who ever truly held him accountable." She stared at him for a long moment. Then finally she spoke. "Tell Damien." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "That I hope he finds what he's looking for." Nicholas nodded slowly. "That's fair." He stood, offering a small smile. "It was good to see you, Sophia, and for what it's worth, I always knew you'd rise higher than any of us." Then he left, and Sophia sat there, staring at the empty space where he had been, not because she was shaken, but because she realized something. She had no anger left, no resentment, nothing. And that was the most freeing feeling of all. That evening, she walked along the beach. The sky was painted in shades of pink and orange, the waves gentle against the shore. She thought about Damien, not with longing, not with regret, just as a chapter that had ended. And she thought about herself, how far she had come, how she had taken every broken piece of herself and built something stronger, something unbreakable. She didn't need closure. She was the closure. As she stood there, her phone buzzed, an email from a global humanitarian organization inviting her to join their advisory board, a new opportunity, a new challenge, a new future. She smiled because she wasn't just free from the past. She was walking boldly into everything that was ahead.